This is usually what I do. I sit on these things.
Have a seat.
And I say, well, that's all right, because that's usually where I talk out of.
Sit yourself down. Welcome to my couch. You're my first interview of the day.
Oh, right.
Yeah, which is a good one. I'm excited.
Let's hope so.
So I'm going to ask you some questions, and then we'll open up to the floor and see if anyone else has any questions as well after. So let's just go back to the beginning. Okay, tell us, how did you become involved with the film, The Dark Crystal?
Somebody phoned me up and said, would you like to talk to Jim Henson? And I said, oh, yes, please. I'm a guy. I love the Muppets. And I remember watching it, and I could never really sit on the chair because I would always skid off because I was laughing so much. So it was an absolute delight to meet Jim. I was very quiet in those days, very like a church mouse. I didn't know quite what to say. I think I was overawed by him, and we had this wonderful dinner. But by the end of it, he seemed to be asking me if I would like to design a film.
Were you nervous?
Well, yes. I mean, I was actually beyond nervous, and yet there was something about Jim that encouraged you to think you could do this. And he didn't actually, I don't know why he asked me. I mean, I know he asked me because he'd seen some of my work on a cover of a book, which was of a troll with a waterfall coming off its nose and a little boy. And that was the trigger, apparently. And then, meanwhile, I did other books, The Land of Froud and then eventually Fairies. But he somehow thought I was the man for it. But what he didn't know is that I was really keen on puppets and making things.
I was lucky.
Yes, but the other thing he didn't know, most of my puppets were made out of chicken bones and snails.
Yeah. Slightly different from the Henson way of doing things. Now let's go back to your love of fairies and your work yourself before we ask more about the Dark Crystal. So I read that you discovered Arthur Rachman's book of fairy tales, okay, and this sparked your interest. So what was it about that book or that author that led you?
Well, I started off going to art school, and I thought I wanted to be a painter.
Yeah.
And I just found it a bit irritating, really. I mean, that people were painting, which I thought, rubbish paintings. But if they could give it a good explanation, it was called good art. And I thought this is patently not so. I just felt that a picture should tell a story somehow. And so I decided I'd try and move into graphic design. Mm-hmm. So as I was waiting for my interview for the graphic design course, I came across a book about Arthur Rackham. And as a child, I'd never seen his books of fairy tales. But when I opened it up, it was just the shock of recognition, I think. It was especially the paintings and drawings of trees. And all the trees had faces in it. And it just reminded me as a child, I was always climbing trees, always in the woods, exploring secret places, and I thought that's how I feel about nature. And then I really got interested in fairy tales because of Arthur Rackham, and then as I was doing that, I became more and more interested in the reality behind fairy tales and started to try and paint real fairies.
So tell me, that leads me on to the next question, actually. For those not close to the world of fairies and mythic creatures, what is it about this world and those creatures that has intrigued you so much through the years?
That it's hidden. It's weirdly, I like a challenge, and it just intrigued me. How do you paint something that you can't see, or people don't believe in it, or how do you make that feel real? And there was a book I did called The Wind Between the Stars by Margaret Mahy, and it was a wonderful children's book, very poignant, but what intrigued me is the wind between the stars, and I had to paint the wind, and in the wind was all these ideas, and I thought that's what I'm really interested in, is painting something that's in between things. So if I was illustrating a book, I tried to illustrate the spaces between the words, to add something, to explore things that were normally hidden. And so that's why I really got intrigued and pursued the unpursuable, I suppose.
Let's go back to the Dark Crystal for a second and tell me, at the time when you were creating these characters, did you realize that you were making something that would be so close to people's hearts, something that was really special?
No. What we did was the film we wanted to see. It was Jim's idea, and I kept doing these funny drawings. And I mean, he knew that he wanted the characters of the mystics to be close to my trolls, so that was a done deal, but all the rest was open.
Right.
And so it meant that as I was exploring the possibilities of what the Skeksis looked like, I mean, the only brief really was that he'd seen a children's book about crocodiles living in a palace, and he liked the idea of reptiles being in an opulent situation. And so I started drawing, and between Frank Oz and Jim Henson, who loved monsters, I mean, all they would say to me is basically, make it worse. And so that was a lot of fun.
Well, you created some really scary creatures.
We had no idea. We just delighted in how deliciously bad they were. And it was only really afterwards that we were rather taken aback, because we weren't really thinking this was for children. I think there was a mistake at the time, thinking, because it was puppets and because the heritage was Muppets, that we were doing a children's film. I mean, now, no, you wouldn't, I mean, people are more keen on marketing, and it is much more focused. However, the types of films that are coming out now are in my day would probably be said was supposed to be a children's film, because they are comic book heroes. That's for children, and isn't it? Well, actually, we all know, no, it's not. Yeah. It's actually, it embraces us all with its images and its motifs, and that's what we thought we were doing in Dark Crystal. So it was a shock, really, that people couldn't understand where it was supposed to be. Well, in fact, it was ahead of its time. As a genre, it makes so much sense now. It didn't then.
Well, I think it's, sometimes it's better not to dupe children, to just make a great film, and if a child or an adult picks it up and enjoys it, then it doesn't really matter. So in an interview, I like this thing that you said in an interview. I want to quote you here. Everything is linked, and we're all linked together one way or another, and we're linked to our land that shows up in both films. So do you believe this in real life, that we're linked? And do you think we may have forgotten about that in modern times? So a heavy one, sorry.
That's a
heavy one for like 11
question,
something in the morning.
I mean, the privilege of working with Jim, his philosophy was that we all really are linked, and we should jolly well get on with each other. And I think that really is so true now. And so, but I mean, so we were kindred spirits in that way. Is that when I was drawing and painting fairies, it was all about landscapes being alive, about what was hidden in trees, what was hidden in rocks, what was hidden in landscapes, and what was hidden there was life and things that communed with each other and also communed with us. And so that was Jim's philosophy. So always, if you look through his work, there's always rocks that move or rocks that sing, or there is always life in the landscape.
You said that your work is not fantasy. Okay, it's not a retreat to anywhere. It's actually a way of refocusing on reality. So I wanted you to explain that a little bit more, and did it relate to the Dark Crystal at all?
I don't think I'm very good at making things up. That's the honest truth. And so, people will say, it's all very well painting fairies, but, do you paint dragons? And I say, well, no, haven't really experienced a dragon. And if I have painted a dragon, I just have to make it up. And they look at you, because I don't make up fairies. They're sort of what I experience. But it is It is that when I look at a landscape, when I look at the world, I'm picturing what it feels like on the inside. And so all these creatures are the feelings and emotions of an inner landscape. And so that's really what sort of shows up in Dark Crystal, because you look at it, and it's a deeply mysterious world. I mean, and because things are not quite resolved, things are not quite finished off. Things you can't figure out are is it a rock? Is it an animal? Is it, what are these things? And is it moving? What is it? And what does it mean? And the fact that we created a whole world deliberately. And deliberately try to create a sense of an ancient history to it, that when you view it, you have to wonder about many things, because we didn't have time to explain it, but I try to feed in enough symbols and enough shapes and forms and possibilities that it is a deep world. In fact, that's work, because it's fed the next generations of comic books and novels, and indeed the new Netflix series.
Yes. You're very good at segues. I'm like, oh, this is great. I know you have to be here. So let's talk about the new Netflix series. Okay, what was your role there? If you had a role, were you involved at all?
Well, traditionally in all these things, because we've been trying to get some Dark Crystal project going for many years. So traditionally, I learn about it on the internet, and then I go, hello, remember me? And they go, oh, really sorry, we meant to tell you. But I've designed many things over the years for new projects, but they've never really happened in the end, for one reason or the other. But the interesting thing about them, they've all been something slightly else, something diluted. They've been maybe some animations, various things. And it was only the genius of Netflix just said, well, we want to do this, but also we want to do it as puppets. Yes. And that's the genius. And so we said, right, we're the men for you. And I was in on the early days of that. I mean, I remember getting a call, because I've been talking to the workshop in Los Angeles, and then we were talking about the possibilities of doing this and the creative challenges it would bring up. And then I got this call one day, and I was talking to this person, and I thought that maybe he was ill, because his voice sounded very strange. And I said, what's the matter? And he said, Netflix has just said they're going to do it. It's a go. And we both went, oh my God, what are we going to do? Because it was a challenge, because we had to do so much. It was 5 years for Dark Crystal, and we had to do 10 episodes really quickly. So, my pencil was on fire as I was drawing, because there are new characters in it. And then, I had to not only design, but we had to start building really quickly.
So you mentioned there's no CGI in this new Netflix series.
There's smidgens of
Little CGI.
Yeah.
Do you think now there's an over-reliance in fantasy TV shows and films to put too much CGI into things? Because I love the look of the Dark Crystal. It's a beautiful film. So what do you think about that?
Yes, I mean, I think the CGI at its best, you just don't notice it, and that's the way it should be. Yeah. But when it's bad, what I would call bad or poor, it gets right in your face. And I think that the biggest problem has been for CGI, and this is really only my own opinion, and it's not necessarily the truth, is the mistake they've been making is they've gone back to early animation, and early animation, when they started to try and animate drawings, realized that there was no life to it. So they started to put in this stretch and squash look, and that seemed to imply there's life. And they do that with CGI, and that ruins everything, because you don't believe it anymore. So but if you root it in reality, it works. And so the great news, if you're using a puppet, you're already being real.
Yes.
The problem is with the puppet, of course, is they don't do very much. And what we did in Dark Crystal is give the illusion they do everything. In fact, it was a lot of very clever angles and film work. And so the biggest challenge of moving that on into working with Netflix was moving our technology on and a movable camera. But when it works, it's just breathtaking. Yeah. And it's because everything is, you go, how do they do that? Yes, I mean, I've seen it and go, how do they do that? And I know how they do it because I was there. But it's because it's real. Yeah. And somehow, through the having human beings puppeteer things, it's not the mechanics of it, it's direct link between a human being and a seemingly inanimate object creates life. It's because you're getting a human, it's all the ticks, the mistakes, all the things that a human being does, translated to the outside, and that's my job as a designer, to get it from the inside to the outside, to make it look like a character, but also feel like a character, emote like a character. Suddenly, if that's working, this thing you're looking at is uncanny. Yeah. And that's the thing that that CGI often loses. And I think people are going to be astonished when they see the Netflix.
I mean, it's been 37 years since the Dark Crystal. It's crazy. And now we've got this Netflix series coming out. So there'll be people who are either watching this all for the first time and going back, or families being introduced, kids being introduced. So what do you hope people take away from the Netflix series and the Dark Crystal when they watch it now for the first time?
That's very difficult to say. I mean, the interesting thing over the years, when I've been out signing books, people have talked about the original Dark Crystal film. The main thing they all say, it scared the bejeebers out of them, which we never really thought about that. But the other one is that their response is always creative. They said they got interested in films, or they got interested in making things, or they wanted to write. It was always creative, and Jim Henson would have been delighted by that, because we used, in the original film, many different disciplines. We used a lot of people that weren't in the film industry, and it shows up on the screen when you look at is craftsmanship. And so again, we've been doing that, and the Netflix thing, we put a lot of effort into the costuming, because into the costuming, I've got to tell part of the story. I mean, you've got to, if you see a character from a distance, and you've never seen it before, you've got to know by its shape, by its silhouette, sort of what it is. And as we get in closer and you see the costume, you know a bit more about it. Yep. And when you get in really close and you see the details, you see the ornaments, there's this other story going on there. And so the physicality of it all is really important for the emotions and the storytelling, but it's accessible. It's real, and it's because it's hands-on. Everybody gets their hands dirty making one of my films.
I've got one last question before we open it out to the floor and see if anyone's got a little question here for Brian. This is the most important question of the whole interview, okay? Do fairies exist?
How can you say they don't?
I want to hear it from you. Do they exist? Have you seen a fairy?
Oh, yes, absolutely they exist. I remember us doing a talk years ago in Denver. I'd been to Boulder, come to Denver, and I told a story about some fairies I'd seen on the way. But one of the questions I asked was to the audience. I say, about believing in fairies. And all I say is, just for one, if you don't believe in fairies, it doesn't matter. But just for one moment, right now, just pretend that you believe. And when you do that, everybody just feels better. Yeah. That's all you need, if you feel better.
So switch off the news and think of fairies. That's my tip for you guys. Now, thank you very much, Brian. I didn't even get through all my questions. It's been lovely. Now, Does anyone here have a question for Brian? Stick your hand up. We've got somebody in the front row here. And we've got someone there. And we've got someone there. Right, okay, cool. Somebody's coming. Okay, hang on. Here we go. Oh, no? Nobody's coming? Shall I just go walk out? Okay. Okay, 1 second. Hi. What's your question for Brian?
Hi. I just want to say that I love the design of the Skeksis. They're so good. It's a bit of a silly question, but what's your, character-wise or design-wise, who's your favourite Skeksis / character from the Dark Crystal?
Oh, I think they all have their own qualities. I mean, I think there was a moment on the Netflix set where I stood, and all the Skeksis were standing just on their stands. There were no actors in them yet. And I just looked at them and I thought, boy, these are just really weird. And then I thought, I did that. And I feel so proud of that, because I think as a creation I think they're outstanding. There's something about them. But it is because Jim Henson gave me the gift of trying to realize something. I mean, to realize these characters. And he threw all his resources behind it. And we did a lot of prototype work, and most of it came about trying to figure out how we're going to make them move and how we're going to manipulate them, because the secret of it is to make them really simple on the inside, really direct for the purposes of puppeteering and to create the illusion they're alive. And then we just had so much fun of just piling on all this weirdness and their ancientness. I mean, they're partly sort of dinosaurs. They're the reptilian dinosaurs, birds, but also the inspiration for them is Miss Havisham from Great Expectations. All their sort of rotting costumes is really her. I mean, that's one of them, but there's all sorts of things that go on in all my stuff. So.
Thank you very much for your question. That's a good question. Has anyone else got a question? I saw this. Oh my goodness, I've only got time for a couple, so let me run over here. Hi. Sorry, so go for it.
So I love Dark Crystal, I love Labyrinth. They were, to this day, they're still my favorite movies. And Dark Crystal did scare the hell out of me as a child. With you moving from Dark Crystal to a new Netflix series in Dark Crystal, do you think you might do a future project on Labyrinth as well?
There's always been rumors about Labyrinth. And there still are strong rumors again, but I really don't know. I'm always the last to know. I mean, I just think Labyrinth would be a great project, with all these different creatures in it. So who knows?
Okay, we've got time for one more question, or maybe we can squeeze in two. I've got this lady here, and then sorry, it's gonna have to be this lady. Quick question, go for it.
Right. First off, you're truly an inspiration to me. A lot of my artwork myself is inspired by you, and I just wondered if you had a tip for people, for fellow artists, that you would be happy to give.
Good question. Thank you.
Tip is, well, don't give up. Do what you want. Let you shine through. Be yourself. I mean, it's always good to take on influences, but it's no good being a cheap version of somebody else. Be an expensive version of yourself, and don't be bullied. I mean, I spent my most creative word throughout my entire career has been no. And so it's knowing what not to do for me was most important. And I've gradually ended up to a place that I didn't know I wanted to be, but it's a place that hopefully it's strong and unique. So don't worry about making mistakes. See life in everything. See life in a scribble, and enjoy it.
Thank you. Okay, Brian, over here. Hello. We've got this lady here. This is the last question. Go for it.
Also, just wanted to say you're a huge inspiration to me as well. I love Labyrinth and the Dark Crystal and always have. My question was, what was the biggest difference, or what are some of the big differences between working on the original Dark Crystal and the new Netflix series? Because obviously technology's enhanced and
Yeah.
just...
I mean, well, time for one. There's say 5 years for one, and this was we just had to really knock it out. But the quality of the Netflix thing is just amazing. We just stepped up another level, and it's not because of anything of technology. It's just about the desire to do it, and indeed getting your hands dirty. But the fascinating thing is that when we did Dark Crystal, it's so long ago. We didn't have green screen, and that's so hard to realize. And so in the Netflix one, we've got some major characters that we've used green screen, and that means we can hide the puppeteers, but we can puppeteer in a very, very traditional way. And so it means that the puppeteers are much more engaged with the character. And that shines through, and that so in one way is going forwards, in another way have gone back. But it's, I mean, it's just so exciting to take the past and propel it now into the future.
Thank
So
you.
I think everybody's going to be amazed when you see it. So.
Thank you very much for. I'm sorry I couldn't get around. Come join me here, Brian. Come join me here in the middle of the stage, guys. This was Brian Froud. Can we have the biggest round of applause for Brian? Like, huge. Thank you. Brian, thank you so much. Thank you for watching the screening, and make sure you check out The Dark Crystal on Netflix when it comes out. And Brian, any final words for anyone?
Just enjoy the show.
Thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you soon. Take care.